Okay, so finally we have the last two Crash games for the PlayStation 2, those being Crash of the Titans and Crash Mind Over Mutants. So why am I talking about both these games in one video? Well, it's because both games are very similar to one another, which is why I think it'd be better to talk about both of them in the same video. Believe it or not, I actually do remember advertisements for the first game, since my cousin was looking forward to playing it. I remember being a bit confused about the concept when seeing the commercials, because this game certainly wasn't any Crash game I was used to, though I don't remember Mind Over Mutant being advertised too much. Now that I have played both games, would I say either of them are worth playing? Why don't we first take a look at Crash of the Titans story, which begins with Cortex attacking Crash and his friends. Before leaving, he manages to abduct Coco. Crash chases Cortex and finally catches up to him and finds out that he has been creating an army of mutants. Not only that, but he's also been working on making an ultimate weapon to destroy Wampa Island. And that's really it. It's just okay. There is one moment in the story that's interesting as it changes up the villains. Other than that though, I really wasn't engaged. A part of that has to do with just how forgettable the characters are, with a slight exception of Nina. I mean, even Cortex is slightly underplayed compared to previous games, making him, unfortunately, very forgettable. Moving on, we have Mind Over Mutant, that starts with Coco and Crunch receiving these strange goggles that they then can't take off and starts turning them into monsters. To get to the bottom of this, Crash and Aku Aku investigate where the goggles come from and help save their friends. Yeah, it doesn't take him too long to figure out that Cortex is behind this as another way for him to take over the islands. Once again, the story is pretty straightforward and simple, and one I really didn't care for. Which is really unfortunate since the story takes place in a world where the mutants have now set up their own civilizations, and I think it would have been cool to see a story more about them adapting to this new world. If there's one other thing I don't like about the story, it would be that the characters are, once again, so unmemorable and confusing at times. Like for instance, the scene when Crash beats Crunch to free him from the goggles, but then continues to attack him, even going as far as blowing him up. Is this supposed to be funny because Crash is too stupid to know better? Is it wacky? Like, what's the tone here? I really don't get it, because to me, it just comes off as weird, annoying, and just plain stupid. In the end, I just really didn't care too much for the stories of either game. When talking about the gameplay, why don't we first go over the mechanics that are the same between both games. They're both kinda action platformers where you will be playing as Crash, who must have gotten drunk before the game started because holy shit is his combat janky, slow, and awkward. Just a basic punch has a weird lunge to it that makes Crash look like he just doesn't know what he's doing. The combat isn't awful, as you will get some basic hits and charge attacks. These charge attacks, by the way, are what you'll be using most of the time since they can break guards, and when used after a 2-hit combo, they make short work of enemies. Though, because of this, Crash's signature spin attack doesn't really serve much use. Platforming wise, Crash has the usual moves, but with one interesting super backflip jump that can actually be pretty useful if you can manage to pull it off, since the controls weren't very responsive when it comes to this move, or maybe the physics were just a bit off. Honestly, it's a bit hard to tell. The only other thing of interest here would be the mutants themselves, who Crash can ride once he's beaten them up enough. Each mutant has a basic attack, a charged attack, and a special move that they can pull off once you've filled up this purple bar. Since these mutants are the focus of these games, there is at least some variety between them. You'll have mutants who can roll around, some who are good at close range combat, and some who are good at long range combat. Alright, yeah, don't worry, the mutants are used for more than just fighting. They are pretty great though for taking out enemies quickly. Mutants are also used to get past certain obstacles, like breaking down walls, hitting targets from a distance, slowing down time, and freezing water. The only other thing worth bringing up here would be these purple orbs, that once you've collected enough of them, Crash can get new moves and attacks and other such benefits. Which is kind of a cool idea, except when it came to certain new moves, I never really found myself using them. So then what makes Crash of the Titans differ from Crash Mind Over Mutant? Well, one big thing. Crash of the Titans is divided up between very linear levels, while Mind Over Mutant is more of an open world game. I don't mind Crash of the Titans being more linear, however, I wish the levels were more interesting and memorable. They lack much of a focus on platforming and instead feel more like they're hallways with enemies you just have to beat, with very few exceptions to this rule. There are a few boss fights as well. They don't feel like boss fights and aren't very hard, but at least they're there. Speaking of challenge, the only thing I found challenging about the game is when the physics weren't right, so I'd often fall and die, and then one particular level that was very poorly designed. If you're wondering, it's the level where you have to cross a falling bridge and use a gorilla scorpion mutant to break down walls on that bridge. It's a fucking awful level that will kill you quite a few times. Moving on to Mind Over Mutant, where, like I had said, it's more of an open world, you're going to be given areas you need to go to progress the game. You are at least given a map to help let you know where you need to go next. But the map doesn't represent the world's layout very well, so it can be easy to get lost and not know which pathway to take to reach your destination. With that being said, there are eventually warp points for fast travel, and the game really isn't that long, lasting only about 5 hours. Plus, I kinda like traveling around this world because the game has a much greater focus on platforming, making areas more fun to explore and revisit. Mostly. You'll be jumping around ruins, rolling through deserts, and climbing icebergs, which certainly stand out much more than the levels in the first game. Another improvement would be that mutants now have the ability to jump, and you can switch between two mutants since you can now hold an extra mutant. As a mutant, you can also collect the purple orbs, which can help power up that mutant if you collect enough of them. Though this really isn't necessary, but it's at least there. Aside from the main objectives, there are these treasure challenges you can do that reward you with purple orbs, and finding these dolls, both of which I really didn't find worth going for. The environments in these games look pretty good. They're full of color and they have a nice cartoon art style to them. As for the character models, well, they are animated well, but the designs are where I'm just not personally feeling it. I wouldn't say that they are awful or look bad, I just don't like them as much because I don't think they fit for a Crash game, though that's just a personal thing. Not only that, but some of the generic enemies look really ugly and don't fit the more cartoony backgrounds at all. On the other hand, I do like some of the designs of the mutants, as they're certainly more interesting to look at, like the slime monster, these cool ghosts and bat-like creatures, and these spiny skunk-looking things. Other mutants though look like they're just jumbled up messes of fucking whatever, like the gorilla scorpions, this god-awful looking octopus boss monster thing, and these just pure shit looking astronaut mutants. Of the two games, Mind Over Mutant gets more of the visual credit due to its more interesting environments and cutscenes. Many of the cutscenes take on different art styles, like a more classic black and white cartoon look, even a South Park look, and kinda anime thing, I don't know, but it's a variety. While the story isn't great, these cutscenes are entertaining to watch and keep things more visually interesting. The music in both games is pretty good too, though it is a bit more subdued and there are some themes that seem to mimic the same beat, making them feel a little too similar to me. Again though, it's not bad music. So, would I recommend Crash of the Titans or Mind Over Mutant? Not really. Neither game is bad. In fact, I would say that of the two, Mind Over Mutant is the better game, as it blends platforming and the mutants much better. Even so, the platforming isn't all that great, the physics can still be a bit off and awkward, and it lacks much replayability. Crash of the Titans is by far the more mediocre of the two, considering it has more repetitive and tedious gameplay. They're both just okay games that I'll never play again. So how did Crash do on the PlayStation 2? Well, compared to his former Sony platforming friend Spyro, he did much better. Of the PlayStation 2 games, Twinsanity is my favorite. I might even like this game more than Crash 2, and it feels more like it was developed by people who actually liked the original series, as opposed to a hero's tale for Spyro. Though most of the PlayStation 2 games are just alright at best, leaving very little impact, especially since they never made another Mutant game after Mind Over Mutant. Things don't look to be over for Crash though, as the original games are getting remakes for the PlayStation 4. And while I don't have high hopes for it, I think this could mean that Crash might be able to make a comeback, and not sadly die off like Spyro had. It might take a while for my next video to come out since it's gonna be quite a different one, but until then, I'm MCB the PS2 gamer, and while I'm not a huge fan of Crash, I do hope he can make a decent comeback. See you all later!